we need to make sure.
Hello, Ethan.
Yes, hello. Okay, so today we're going to begin a new unit as we are looking at the discovery and encounter, conquest of North America, and just depending if I have some extra time, there's a video that I might show that I need to set up that I don't have on there with a DVD player. But nonetheless, we're going to be looking at the early American discovery, encounter, conquest of the New World as it relates to European impact. I'm reading a book right now about potential Chinese discovery of California before 1492, which would make a rather interesting situation. Of course, I believe the Chinese would have had the technology to do that. Whether they did or not is another question. And I also think the American Indians probably have Oriental descent, so the fact that they might find some genetic connection doesn't mean that there were Chinese that sailed across the Pacific Ocean in order to bring that about. But nonetheless, that's an interesting side note that I might be able to throw into a course next time around. But so let's have a prayer. We're going to begin with the discovery, encounter, and conquest. So let's pray. Father, I pray that you will be with us and help us as we study and learn together. And in this class, that you will enable us to learn about the history of the United States, North America, contracting down to the United States, see you in the flow of historical events, and as we prepare for exams or other opportunities, we pray for your special grace and blessing upon us. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. Okay, so I'm sure that when we come to our test, the test will be available online because, Ethan, you're going to have to take it that way. But I will probably have paper tests for those in the room. And so if you're here, I'll have a paper test for you to take, and then I'll grade that. So, discovery, encounter, and conquest 1492. Now this verse will begin before 1492. I should really change this, like 1000 AD with a big question mark. We're not exactly sure. But here we have the earliest connection to North America by Europeans is believed to be the Scandinavian explorer Eric the Red. Now Eric the Red was the son, and his son Leif Erikson, son of Eric, Leif Erikson, came to Newfoundland and they found a new land. So Newfoundland, the island of Newfoundland, and lesser degree, Greenland and Iceland, which are Scandinavian possessions of. Iceland is its own country now, but Denmark is the parent colonizing power for Greenland. And on more than one occasion, Donald Trump, and even earlier than that, Eisenhower and Truman there are many presidents in recent time that have tried to buy Greenland because of its strategic importance for the United States. But Eric the Red had gotten himself in trouble, accused of a crime against the royal family of Norway and Sweden, and he knew that he would be killed, so he decided that he would just sail out into the Atlantic and hope for the best. Because you're going to get killed anyway, you might as well go try and find a new place to live. And so he is credited with discovering Newfoundland there. Not much was known about that in southern Europe, But there were clearly fishing operations for the Norwegians, for cod fishing and others, and several months in Greenland, Newfoundland, maybe even into northern Quebec on the mainland. In 1000, the 11th century, 12th century, 13th century, waiting on the other explorers to come about. Now, early Iberian explorers, you have Vasco da Gama, who will lead the charge. Now, actually, it goes back to the Prince Henry the Navigator, who was a cartographer and a believer in maps. And Portugal, although today we might not think of Portugal as being a major country of strategic importance, but back then, in the early 15th century, late 14th century, Portugal was the country that had the most advanced shipping and naval technology, and they are on the Atlantic Ocean, they're on the Iberian Peninsula. And what they decided to do was to go to Asia around Africa. They were convinced that you couldn't, let me just say this, no one believed the earth was flat. That if you sailed out into the Atlantic Ocean, you'd get to the edge and fall off. That no one believed that. They just didn't think that America was there. And so there was no way to take enough provisions along that you would be able to survive the journey going from Spain all the way to China. It was too long. So that was the thought. The earth is too big. They didn't know America was there. And so if you wanted to go all the way around, it was too long. And they couldn't go by land anymore because in 1452, the city of Constantinople will fall to the Muslims, cutting off the trade routes overland to China and India. So they wanted to go around by sea. So the goal would be to go around Africa. Now what the Portuguese decided was, even though people believed that there were sea monsters and boiling seas and sinkholes, any number of problems you could run into, islands with humans with dog faces that would attack you. And how would you know what was true and what wasn't true? You might say that's not true, but let me tell you, how did they know? These books were a mixture of real things and fake things, and in such a way that no one would know for sure what was really true. So, what they did was, the Portuguese were ordered, Henry the Navigator ordered the captain to sail the boat around Africa as far as the men would go, push them as far as they would go. When they are going to mutiny, throw you overboard, and you've gotten them as far as you can go off to the shore, erect a monument saying it's safe this far, but we got scared, and then go home. The next group knows that if they get that far, it's safe. Then go the rest of the way as far as you can, and you will eventually have to turn back because the men will be afraid. It is eventually this man, Vasco da Gama, who is the first to go around Africa and make it all the way to India and back. The recovery of spices and other cargo is so lucrative that it more than pays for all of the expeditions that had been done up to that time. It becomes a profitable trade in spices. Nutmeg, cinnamon. Let me tell you, before this, food was just food. You know, instead of you just go to the table and you wouldn't have to ask, what are we having today? It's food. The same thing you had yesterday and the day before. You just get food. That would be simple, wouldn't it? If it was still that way. You just go to a food station and get a bowl while you're traveling. No looking at menus. Well, eventually, people decided, let's put a little of this little spice here in the food. And so, or you had to cover over the fact that half the time the meat and vegetables you were eating were partially spoiled with spices to make it palatable. That made these trips valuable. So Vasco da Gama does that. Another individual is Christopher Columbus. Now, I was always under the impression that Christopher Columbus will go sailing west to go east because the Portuguese had already gotten the trade route around in Africa sewn up. Now, he won't get to India until after 1492, but they already had that route established. That was their territory. The Spanish wanted a different trade route, so let's let this man try it. And Christopher Columbus was wrong about how big the earth was. He thought the earth was 5,000 feet smaller in circumference than it was. So he believed he could make it all the way to China with a boatload of supplies. Now, if it wasn't for the fact that he wound up in Panama or the Bahamas or somewhere, he would have starved. And he didn't exactly know where he was. But he gets there, and that he does in the name of Spain. He will develop these trade routes. He makes 4 trips to the New World, attempts the first mainland settlement. At first, he really does believe that he is in China. That's why the American Indians are called Indians, because he thinks they're in India. And in fact, for a while, he makes a rule that anyone who suggests they're not in India will have their tongues ripped out. He cannot handle the thought. If you're not in India, if we're not in India, where are we? Where are we? Everywhere he thinks, around the next bend, and you're going to get around the next bend, and then it's off to India. It's going to go see the Emperor of China. Well, if I'm not there, where am I? That question just blows the mind. If I'm not there, where am I? That's a big question. He doesn't know. So, this will open up Spanish settlement eventually in Florida, the Caribbean islands, and in South America. The Portuguese will get control of Brazil. France, first probes into the New World are by Giovanni de Verrazzano. Now, of course, Christopher Columbus was an Italian sailing for Spain, and Verrazzano, as you can tell, that's an Italian name too. There aren't too many, well, there could be Verrazzanos that live in France, I'm not so sure. But nonetheless, the Italians do not do their own exploration, but they seem to be hiring out well. And Verrazzano will explore the eastern United States. In fact, if you go to New York, the entryway into New York, the Verrazzano Narrows, there's a Verrazzano Bridge. Although France doesn't claim any of that territory, they were the first to see it. And then also Jacques Cartier, he will explore the interior of Canada, the St. Lawrence River, and down into founding the little settlements that will eventually become Quebec City and maybe Montreal. And so he is looking, and these people believe there had to be a water route across North America somewhere. Up the Hudson River into New York, or through the St. Lawrence River, or somewhere. There just has to be. There isn't, but they spend a lot of time looking for it. They're looking for this water route across the New World. Now, another of these explorations, once they get here, will be Spain's New World possessions. Now, Hernando Cortez, he will claim Mexico for Spain and will bring the Aztecs and some other tribes of Indians, nationalities of Indians in that area under Spanish rule. Ponce de Leon, a very small man, not quite 5 feet tall, will discover Spanish settlements in Florida. The Pope, I think it was in 1519 when they will first arrive in Florida, and the first Mass is celebrated in North America. And in 1919, the Pope came over here and celebrated a Mass on the 500th anniversary of that event there in St. Augustine at the same location, which is quite a remarkable event. Hernando de Soto will explore Florida, Southeast North America, and establish the first city there, St. Augustine, the first city in North America. Now, here is the Fountain of Youth. Now, you need to be careful when you go there if you drink from it. I was there. My wife and I even visited this on our honeymoon. And you know, when we were there, we met this lady who had a small child, a little boy in her arms, and she was very distressed. And we said, you know, how might we help you? And he said that she and her husband came to see the Fountain of Youth, and that he had drank too much of the water. And this was the result. And he was the one who knew how to drive the car. She wasn't sure how she'd get home because he had drank so much water. He had not only stayed young, he had gotten younger. So I don't know. I was very cautious in drinking the water after that. Didn't want anything to go wrong. And they claim that one of the things that caused them to believe in this story about the Fountain of Youth, which they were trying to find, is that the Indians that lived there were like giants compared to the European settlers who were barely 5 feet tall. I mean, the Indians were like 6'5", and you have a whole group of big, robust people of that nature, and they are convinced there must be something in the water or something that is causing this. Anyway, if you go there, you can still visit the Fountain of Youth, and it's a very interesting little presentation that they are presenting. This is another picture of the first Catholic Mass by Father Lopez there, and they do, if you visit the Fountain of Youth, they still have a fairly accurate representation of what it would have been like for them to have set that up there at the lake shore. Here's another picture, St. Augustine, Castello de San Marcos. This is a fort. It is the oldest masonry fort in North America, built by the Spanish. It would have been painted with white and red markings to identify it as a Spanish fort. It's made out of a kind of shell that is fused seashells, and it makes it very good for use in construction of a fort, because when cannonballs will slam into it, it has give to it. It's sturdy, but it'll have give, and so the cannonball will just kind of like sink into the fort and not break the fort or break the walls. They'll just sort of be smushed a bit. It absorbs the energy, so it was very well done. You can visit this. It is owned by the National Park Service now. This Fort Matastas is another interesting little fort, and I've been all through that. up on the roof and in the areas. I've looked out that window, and I brought my little figurine, which is a figurine of it, that this is very typical of the kind of small fortification that you would use for a backwater. This protected the harbor. But there's a river that flows behind St. Augustine. If you wanted to come in by the back door and attack from behind, you would be encountering this little fort where you'd have a cannon up here and some men that would be on the roof or in the barracks here or inside that would have rifles that could shoot and stop a ship from coming up the backside. And it actually worked, because in the early 1700s, General Oglethorpe, who founds Georgia, there's war between Spain, and this fort is actually used to defeat the British as they're trying to come in the back door to attack St. Augustine. So if you want to take a look at my little figurine, you can pass that around. Yeah, and this is a free national park site, and they even give you a free boat ride across the river over to the island where the fort is. So it's definitely worth stopping to see. Here we're looking at the travels of Hernando de Soto. He will travel all through the southeast up into Georgia. Those Mogi mounds that I mentioned that are in Macon, Georgia, he was there. Up into the Carolinas to Alabama. He will die, some think in conflict with the Indians, others maybe by disease, and his body was tossed into the Mississippi River. So we don't know exact, somewhere maybe in Arkansas or Mississippi, somewhere up there. So we're not really sure exactly where he met his demise, but that was sort of the end of him. Francisco de Coronado, another Spanish explorer, will come up through Mexico into the southwest, looking for the famed cities of gold. They don't find any, but looking for those, and will establish the Picos, one of the ruins that I mentioned, we were there, Picos ruins this summer. And then into Colorado, discovered the Grand Canyon, which he thought was just completely useless land. So he explores the southwestern part of the United States. Here we see the San Miguel Mission there in Santa Fe. Spanish friars established a mission in Santa Fe in 1610. And if you go to Santa Fe, we were there this summer. One of the great things about this is that this is the capital of northern Spain. They are not as excited about their heritage as they once were. There's a big block of plywood over the statue of the founding Catholic missionary that established Santa Fe, because now he's seen to be someone who was somewhat mean to the Indians, and he probably was. But nonetheless, his statue was not visible. But I've been in this church, and this church was built in 1610. Now it's an adobe structure, so it has to be redone all the time. Inside, if you go inside the church, there is a section about the size of 3 feet square that has plastic over it that they claim the plaster under it is original from 1610. Everywhere else, it's been some series of renovation, and is definitely worth a visit. There is also the Lorenz Chapel there in Santa Fe that has a beautiful staircase that is believed to have been built by Joseph himself, who came back to save them when the main architect of the church was murdered. And it is a beautiful staircase, I must say. It has no nails or pins in it, and it is held together simply by the weight of the stairs, one on top of the other. And it's put together like as a huge jigsaw puzzle, and once it's set, it's stable. They did put some supports around it because now cars and trains and things are driving by and shaking it constantly, and they're afraid it will fall apart. But that's what, you can also visit the oldest house in the United States there in Santa Fe. And in fact, I could possibly, if I have a few seconds here, show some pictures of that when we visited the oldest house when we were in Santa Fe this summer. But when Hernando Cortez arrived in Mexico from Cuba, he did so with 11 ships, 600 fighting men, 200 servants, 16 horses, 32 crossbows, 13 muskets, and 14 mobile cannons. This is in 1419. The American Indian ruler allowed Cortez to approach towards the capital city. Eventually, 60,000 Indians were killed during the fighting. Most tribes in Central America accepted Spanish rule or were enslaved. The last major development of Spanish presentation here is Vasco Balboa, who crossed Panama and discovered what? On the other side of Panama, it's an ocean. It starts with a P.
The Pacific?
The Pacific Ocean. It's like Kelsey's Ocean. The Pacific Ocean. And this proved that they weren't in China, because they got across the Isthmus of Panama, and there's another ocean there that they have to cross in order to get to China. This solved that problem. We are not in China. Do you know why we're called America and not Colombia? Because it was another Italian, these Italians are popping up everywhere, another Italian, Amerigo Vespucci, who figured out that America was a separate continent and drew the first map, pretty bad map, but drew the first map of North and South America as a separate continent and named it after himself, America. I mean, if I would have done that, maybe we'd be living in Richardia. We are living in America. Now, French colonization. We had mentioned about Cortez, but the French will conquer the interior of North America, the Mississippi River Valley, the St. Lawrence River Valley, and the area around the Great Lakes. Samuel de Champlain gave his name to Champlain Lake in upstate New York, on the border between Vermont and New York, but he's also the discoverer of the St. Lawrence Valley, 1603, established Quebec, aligned with the Huron Indians in order to defeat other Indian tribes, and settled Montreal in 1611. He was open to the establishment of Jesuit missions, along with the Iroquois and other Indian groups up here, and so there was strong connection there. Settlement was restricted to natural-born French Catholics. So, if you wanted to live in New France, you had to be a French-born citizen. So they didn't allow people from other countries to come. I suppose if there were people who were born there, they could stay, but you couldn't come there if you were from another part of the world. And their main situation was the fur trade. John Day, my French is horrible, so it's Berbro or something along that line. Anyway, he is the national hero of Catholic missions in Quebec. In fact, it's a national holiday in Canada to celebrate him, and he was persecuted by the Indians, and I could show you the video that is in a little historical thing about Catholic saints. He was killed in an excruciating, horrible way. I mean, they ripped off his fingernails, they cut out his tongue, they cut his, just awful things, and made him run and beat him. It makes me hope that the man was really saved. So here we go with this gentleman. But this is the kind of connection. Now, some of the Indians did become strong Catholics during this period. Now, Holland and Sweden. Holland and Sweden are minor players in the world, but they did have aspirations for empire, especially back then. Sweden was a much stronger country than it is now, as far as its present than what it is dealing with now. Here are the two areas of presentation that we are looking at. One, New Netherlands was established along the Hudson River by the explorer Henry Hudson. He liked to name things after himself, so he is going to name the river after himself, Hudson River. He is also the discoverer of a bay in Canada. Anyone know what it is? Hudson Bay, you are correct. His goal was to find the Northwest Passage. So, if you've ever been up there in New York, especially a little bit north of New York City, up near Tappan Zee, where the Tappan Zee Bridge is, good place for a Tappan Zee Bridge in Tappan Zee, New York. The river expands as it comes out of New York to being more than a mile wide. I mean, and if you have no idea how big North America is, you might think you're already through it. Oh, it's starting to widen out here a little bit. We're going to be on our way to China. And then you're realizing, oh, this is not going in the right direction. We're going north, and then it's getting narrower again. He gets all the way up here to what is known as Fort Orange, which is Albany today. He is sailing, even though he's an Englishman, he is sailing for the Dutch and claiming this land for the Dutch. So, New Amsterdam, New York, or Fort Orange. The orange seems to be the symbol of the Dutch. I mean, Syracuse University, they're the Orange Men because of their Dutch heritage. So this area here becomes a Dutch colony. Peter Stuyvesant will be the early military leader, and he was a very strong and purposeful leader. Somewhat difficult to get along with. Some believe he was stern and mean, partly because he had lost a leg in a cannonball accident in which, when he was commanding a Dutch ship, a cannonball from an opponent's ship hit him in the knee and took off his leg. That might make you a little cranky. And he was very strict, and he ruled the Dutch with fervor. While this is going on, the Swedes set up a new settlement down here on the Delaware River near Fort Christina, which is now Wilmington, Delaware, and set up a settlement on the Delaware River. This was a very small settlement. There was never really a large Swedish presence there. And after some time, the Dutch, New Netherlands, they send an army down across New Jersey to conquer them that actually had more people in it, more soldiers, than they had citizens total. Not talking about the military attaché, but everyone who was living there. There were more soldiers coming to attack them than they had people. And so they just surrendered. So this whole area here in the middle, southeast Pennsylvania, in fact, there's areas here that are New Holland, Pennsylvania, which comes from this idea up here, New Amsterdam, New Holland, New Jersey. This whole area in the middle colonies is going to come under Dutch control until they are taken over by the British. Now, early British colonization, they are late to the game. Now, early on, the British do try and make a few inroads in colonization, but they're too busy trying to figure out if they're Catholic or Protestant or what their problems are with religion, so they don't have time to do this. But eventually, they will first try and make a settlement down here in Roanoke, in North Carolina. At first, in 1497, 1498, 1508, the Cabots, that's a group will eventually be a very powerful family in Maryland. But anyway, the Cabots are looking for a waterway to the Orient, Northwest Passage. They're sailing about in different places. But the English are on the sidelines because of their religious turmoil that takes precedence in the early 1500s when they're doing their Reformation thing. So in the 1530s and 1540s and 1550s and 60s, then they get their act together. They don't really have time for this. Now, Protestant crusaders, pirates, and explorers are very effective. Probably the most effective of these is Francis Drake. There he is, Francis Drake. And he was known as a sea dog. He was a pirate. He would sneak around and steal things from the Spanish. And this part of this causes the war between Spain and England, when Queen Elizabeth I will knight him instead of arresting him. She's asked to arrest him and stop him from doing this stealing. And instead, she will knight him and say, I will commission you to keep doing what you're doing because it is beneficial to us. Now, they will eventually try and make their first permanent settlement in 1584 when Sir Walter Raleigh will find the first settlement in Roanoke on Roanoke Island. And John White, when he returns, will discover that the colony has disappeared. And most people have no idea. We don't know for certain what happened to them yet. We have no idea. But the old settlement is preserved by the National Park Service.
The first English colony in the New World was nothing short of a disastrous failure. In 1585, Sir Walter Raleigh took a group of 108 men to an island off the coast of North Carolina's Outer Banks to set up the Roanoke Island colony. This was 22 years before the settling of Jamestown and 37 years before the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth Rock. This first venture was doomed from the beginning.
Doomed.
The colonists were ill-prepared and fairly unintelligent. Even though they were dependent upon the native peoples in the area, and they had been informed that these people were loving and faithful, the colonists would kidnap and hold them hostage in hopes of gaining information on this new world. The colony's supplies dwindled, and they found themselves desperate by the time supply ships returned. When Sir Francis Drake arrived in Roanoke, the entire colony loaded onto the ship and returned for England. Drake took these colonists but left 15 of his men behind to look after the colony. These men were never seen again. This was the beginning of the mystery known as the Lost Colony. In July of 1587, Raleigh led another campaign to colonize Roanoke Island. This time, he brought not only men, but women and children as well. Each settler was offered a plot of land on which to build and help settle his city of Raleigh. They never made it inland as planned, so this new city would be built amid the ruins of the former colony. Among these colonists, there was a woman, Elizabeth Dare, who was with child at the time. Her daughter, Virginia Dare, was the first English child born in the American colonies. As tensions grew high between the settlers and the Indians, the colonists found themselves needing more supplies. Governor John White set sail to England planning to return with the much-needed supplies. When he returned, he found the colonists, including his daughter and granddaughter, Elizabeth and Virginia, had vanished. The only clues left behind to their disappearance were the letters C-R-O engraved on a tree and the word Croatan etched into the gatepost. So, what happened to the colony? There are many theories surrounding the disappearance of the Roanoke Island colonists. Some believe that they were killed off by the Spanish. While this appears possible, as the English and the Spanish were fighting over who would control the wealth found in the new land, research has shown that the Spanish had no knowledge of this colony, so it seemed highly unlikely that they would be found responsible. Another theory states that the colonists were killed by the Indians. This theory stems from a story told by Chief Powhatan to John Smith. Smith had inquired about the colonists, and Powhatan responded that he had killed the colonists who had taken residence with the Chesapeake Indians. Other than Powhatan's statement, there is no proof to back up this theory. That theory did, however, provide some information concerning another theory, that the lost colonists had taken upon themselves to leave the colony and assimilate into the Indians' culture. There are many different tribes that are linked to this theory: the Hatteras Indians, the Chesapeake Indians, and more recently the Luby Indians. The latter group is a group of descendants from the Hatteras Indians. This theory is the most acceptable theory, as this group of Indians has many English-sounding words and names in their native tongue. The tribe has always maintained that their ancestors include the Roanoke colonists, but like all other claims, there is no first-hand proof that this is the case. Some mysteries can never be solved. Sometimes the pieces of the puzzle become lost over time, and there is nothing we can do to find the true answers. But the mystery is also what keeps our interest up and the memory alive. While we may never know what happened to the lost colony of Roanoke Island, we will continue to investigate and in a way keep the colony and its inhabitants alive and found forever.
Joy suggested when we were there that they turned into mermaids and swam off. I can't say that there's any evidence of that. Okay, here are some pictures I took when we were there back some years ago for a visit. These are some of the fortifications rebuilt by the National Park Service at the location where they would have built their fort on the island. Oh, by the way, this is the same island where Andy Griffith is buried, but you cannot visit his grave. He won't allow that. But just thought I'd let you know where you can be disappointed at not seeing it. There you can see, you can walk inside the fortification. And this is where they put on a outdoor play that tells the story of the disappearance of the colonists using various of the theories. And then this is the Chesapeake Bay, not Chesapeake Bay, but the, not Chesapeake Bay, it would be the Outer Banks, the water between here and some of the outer islands there in North Carolina. And someday I want to go back and attend this. Somewhere here, and I don't think I have a picture of it, there's a place where before their very first show, President Roosevelt was put in his wheelchair and sat at a certain spot, and they did a performance just for him and his entourage because he wanted to see it, but he didn't want people to know he was in a wheelchair. And so, but where he was sitting is still marked. They'd not put a chair there where his wheelchair was rolled in. So I would love to visit that. There's 2 colonists that were discovered on our way while we were there. I guess they're working on their Junior Ranger booklets. This is back some years ago. That's Berman, that's Joy. But there's nice little walkways there that one can see. That is the coastline. Now, if you go to Florida, and I could pull up pictures from this too. There's a national historic site that commemorates where Ponce de Leon made his, where he came and settled in, or came into Florida and then did his walking around North America. So, now, some of the things that that we have benefited from because of this exchange, much of native population unfortunately died of disease. Many of them died of disease even before settlement. I'm told that some of the ships, even from Verrazano and others, were like traveling disease bombs all along the coast, and that the bacteria and things on the ships were able to start making Indians ill even before white settlement, because there were significant epidemics of diseases. We don't know exactly what they were, but whether it was smallpox or even the common cold, measles, things of that nature that were killing people, and so that many of the Indians were decimated even before there was settlement. But there was lots of death because of disease. Now, Europeans learned of new plants that were very, very helpful. They used trees for fuel and building material for food. They found an abundance of fish and oysters, especially down in Georgia, the Carolinas, along the coastline, beautiful breeding grounds. And then they developed new plants, probably the most important plants that were discovered in the New World, besides chocolate. That was in South America. Chocolate and tobacco, we don't want to talk about that. But our tomatoes, can you think of Italian food without tomatoes? There was a day when they had no tomatoes, and they were having food. Tomatoes and potatoes. Potatoes were discovered in the New World, and they say that one of the things that really changed was women's health because of potatoes. And eating potatoes and other starchy foods, potatoes especially, made women healthier and more likely to survive childbirth because their bodies were stronger and wouldn't hemorrhage as easy and had more strength to them. And in Europe, where they didn't have potatoes, that was a huge problem. This solved that. Now, some people wouldn't eat potatoes because they were afraid they were poisonous. It is true, don't eat the plants, because there's a tendency that they are connected to the Cyniaid family, but the roots are okay. But don't eat the leaves. Don't make a salad out of the leaves. Just like don't eat the leaves off a cherry tree. That might kill you too. But potatoes, huge change. and another one would be peanuts, sweet potatoes, sugar, beets, and sugar cane. Before that, most sweetener was with honey. Now, the Spanish introduced to the New World horses. Horses were brought to the New World, and all wild horses, wherever they are in the West or in the, on the outer banks of North Carolina, wherever, they're all wild horses that were either let loose or escaped from Spanish settlers who brought them to America at one point or another. There weren't any before that.
So like all horses?
All horses. There were no horses in North America. Not in North America. There were no horses in North America before that. None. Okay, so we'll see you next time, Monday.
Where would Kentucky be without horses?
Well, we'd be racing goats or something. I'm not sure. But we wouldn't be racing horses without the Spanish bringing them here. That's for sure.
Thank you.
Yes.